Welcome to Dil Ki Recipes on your favorite social media platform. Hi, I'm Dr. Sheeza Mohsin, executive coach, relationship expert, and your coach in this virtual space to support you and your Desi family in America. If you identify as being a person of color, a minority, and having some form of bicultural identity, a major goal of putting this information out is to help you realize you're not alone in this journey. If you identify as a Desi with cultural roots in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and surrounding areas, trying to meet your life and relationship needs and desires while embracing some beautiful elements of your cultural heritage, Dil Ki Recipes is for you. If you don't identify as a Desi, but have a warm, loving, human being kind of disposition and you want to better yourself, I think you'll find some good stuff in here as well. So let's go on with the show. Hello, everyone. I am Sheeza Mohsin, and I'm here today to talk with you about a very important topic, especially as it relates to us professional women and men who kind of sometimes find ourselves minimized in this space. And the topic is intimacy and self care. And we'll talk more about it. But before I delve into the topic, I want to say hi to my colleague and friend, Cherylyn. Cherylyn, welcome. And thank you so much for engaging in this conversation with me.
Shiza, it's a pleasure. I'm so excited for this podcast. When we first met, I was instantly drawn to your energy. You had this really warm energy, authenticity that made me feel safe to share something that I usually keep to myself. But we just met at that time and I shared this thing with you. And I would like to ask you, how do you think that ability to create safety and connection with someone plays into your work as a coach and therapist?
Sherilyn, I want to thank you so much. I'm honored with your feedback, but I will tell you, I felt exactly the same way about you. You had so much warmth, you exuded, and you were so open. I want to tell our viewers and listeners that the first time Sherilyn and I met was in Japan, in Tokyo, and we toured this beautiful, fascinating temple together, Meiji Jingu. And Sherilyn, thank you so, so much. I want to tell you that, in coaching and counseling and therapy and all of those supportive spaces, I feel that is the most important thing. And connecting with someone and showing up as your genuine, authentic self. I don't know really what I do, but I do know that when I show up in all earnesty, in genuineness, at the core of my being is that I want to make sure that the person that is interacting with me in that space gets something, whether it's a learning, whether it's affirmation, whether it's acceptance, something out of that experience. So I do try my best. I am very fortunate as well that I get to work with wonderful people and I get to dialogue with amazing people like you.
Oh my gosh. And you said write me or call me or text me. Some people say that and they don't really, don't really do it. But with you, I felt like, no, this is somebody I want to continue talking with. And we did. And look at us, we're doing this
I
podcast together.
I've loved our exchanges because I really feel this is something as we mature in our professional spaces. I think what ends up happening is that we show up guarded a lot more than we show up authentic because we're always wondering how the other person is judging us. What is the agenda? What is the goal? And I feel that a lot of times we lose the purpose of just a beautiful human connection.
Right.
And we are so hyper focused on what this means and what this could be that we forget to be genuine. And I have noticed that, in the last 2 decades that I've worked in this space, and I really am at a point in my life where I don't think it mattered to me then too. And so many people have told me that initially they were like, oh my God, she's so warm. And I'm like, okay for them to think whatever, because eventually they'll realize that's just me. It's not me trying to be performative or there is an agenda. That's just how I am. So,
Mm.
I think that a lot of times there are many benefits of the corporate world, but I think it sometimes gives us that subliminal message that we have to be guarded in that space.
This brings me to my next question. So, you've worked extensively in corporate settings and have a long-standing practice providing counseling and coaching to executives and couples and families. And now you're building your presence in social media, with podcast is one of them. So, can you share your vision for this next chapter and what you're hoping to create or communicate through these, terms?
Thank you so much for asking. And by the way, this whole podcast world, I will say that I totally have imposter syndrome in this space because I don't think that that is a space I am great at. which is what's pushing me to pursue in that space. Because a lot of times we shy away from spaces we're not great at. So I feel like a beginner in this space. I know how to do my work really well, I think. This is a whole new world. So there were two goals and motivations. And absolutely, I feel like I'm in chapter 2 of life. I feel very fortunate to have the career experience and the life experience that I've had. And what I notice is that with time, with life demands and how your work happens, you become inaccessible to those who may not be able to afford your services. And given that I grew up in a very philanthropic family where social services and volunteering was a big part of my family trajectory, I remember I was 9 years old carrying pails of buckets, walking behind my father who was collecting donations for polio vaccines in Pakistan. And so I started feeling that I am not giving back as much as I would like to. And I feel that social media is such a powerful tool to get messages across for someone who might be struggling in a space and isolating.
Mm.
And a lot of times, my clients would send me reels and minutes of clips and say, "What do you think?" And then I would find myself saying, "Well, this really resonates with me. And this is not at all substantial. This is not even making sense." And then the response was, "Well, this has 2 million views." And I'm like, just because it has 2 million views, then make it right. And in the past decade, so many of my clients have told me, "You should do this." And I'm like, I don't know how to do this stuff. Like, I'm not in my comfort zone. So, of course, if we're not excelling at something, why should I put myself out there? So, I will tell you that this is a journey, but I definitely see value in that I do have some sensibility that I would like to share with the larger world,
Mm.
especially those people, young professionals who are in colleges and who are just starting their careers, who may not have access to individual expertise, will be able to gain something from this. And I really feel when you put good out in the universe, it comes back to you in some form or the other.
I love that. And it really resonates with me. I love how you bring your clinical and your corporate experience to a more accessible space. I love that. And I think there's a great need for grounded culture that you bring. It's warm and authentic when you bring this into the online world. I'm excited to see what you're gonna come up with. But this ties in also with what I want to talk about for today's podcast. Our theme today is intimacy as self-care. In your work with clients from a wide range of cultures, ages, backgrounds, how often does intimacy or the lack of it come up as a factor in the overall sense of life satisfaction or dissatisfaction? I guess I want to ask is where do you suggest we start in beginning to understand how intimacy and cultivating pleasure and play and sexual connection in relationships isn't just indulgent, but it's essential?
I'm hearing from you, Sherilyn, and I so appreciate you wanting to talk about this topic. This is not a very popular topic because a lot of times in the professional world, we end up minimizing our sexual selves because we are so focused on performing. And so this is very interesting because as I started getting trained in, sexualities over time, I realized, and it came from questions and observations that I was making in my coaching sessions and my counseling sessions with clients, is that it's almost like a mention and a run away from it. It's like, oh, we never have time for sex. That's just not something. She's so busy. He's so tired. I would hear that, and there was like a touch and go. Like, that is not a space I'm going to even explore. And what
Mm.
I started noticing was that there is an emotional feeling or experience that's coming up there that my clients were not able to unpack or process. And it's almost like as we age, as we mature, as we become successful at things, we almost settle in this space. So you might be getting an A plus in life, but in your romantic sexual relationships or space of play and pleasuring, you're okay with a C minus because you're like, I should be grateful. I have this. And so as we age and as we become mature, it's almost like we're settling with saying, this is not important. And
Mm.
just saying that makes me sad for so many people. Sherilyn, when you and I were talking and you brought this topic up, and I want to talk a little bit about you and why this conversation is happening with you, because, I do get requests for all kinds of topics, but a lot of things about how you brought it up and how our initial conversation about this came about that intrigued me to having this conversation with you. Sherilyn, just a little bit focus on you. You wrote a modern love essay for the New York Times. That really resonated with a lot of people. It was funny, it was intimate, it was so human. A lot of times that human element is missing as we're talking about it because, we show our imperfections in that space. Could you talk a little bit about that piece, what inspired it, and what was the kind of response you received? Because it's so important. And I'm just so excited to hear about it on this podcast.
Thank you, Shiza. Yeah, so I've been an avid reader of the Modern Love column every Sunday for years and years, and I always thought I have a story to share. And I thought my story is unique enough, it's distinct enough from the other stories, but also similar in that it has emotional truths. And so I wrote and submitted and didn't really think about it, but I was so surprised how quickly the New York Times picked it up. And then I became super nervous about how it would be received. My relationship with my partner, it doesn't really fit the typical mold, especially within the Chinese Filipino community of which I belong. And so, our community, the Chinese Filipino community, there's often a set idea of what love and marriage should look like, and ours is not like that. So, but the response from readers was so heartwarming. I heard from people across different cultures and backgrounds who said, I saw myself in your story, or thank you for putting that into words. And that meant so much to me as a writer and also as a person because it reminded me how powerful it is to share our stories, how powerful it is to speak honestly and be vulnerable about our truths, even when it feels really, really risky. So thank you for asking about that.
Cherylyn, it's just so
Uh,
heartwarming hearing that. And I will tell you because, I speak with a lot of clients, and a lot of my clientele is from the South Asian diaspora. A lot of my clients, so, from all cultures. And by now, I've worked with pretty much a person or lots of communities on every continent. And what you said really resonates because, those are the topics we don't talk about. And our
mm,
stories have so much common ground. But most importantly, what stood out, and I hope that our listeners and viewers go and check out your article. What we'll do is at the end of our podcast, I'll post a link there so they can
in the
actually
show notes, yeah. Mm,
read your article, is that there is so much of the human element that as we are being successful, and I want to talk about your career trajectory as well, that, we're human. We're imperfect. And then we come with these preconceived notions because a lot of my client base is multicultural. There are lots of cultural influences there. So we're taking with us these set of values that we believe that we were raised in and that belong to and then the third set that's belonging to the culture we're existing in.
mm,
So intersecting and coming up with our own model of what we can live with becomes so complicated sometimes. And you
mm.
simplified it in that. So I'm just so excited for people who listen to this podcast and who view our YouTube when they read it. I want to point out because it's not a coincidence that you were able to write such a beautiful and heartfelt article. You do have that knack and you have a bachelor's and a master's in psychology. So obviously that makes a huge difference. You've been working at the intersection of people, culture, communications. Right now you live in Japan. Like it was so beautiful. And, because I have a couples focus and I work with C suite executives and senior professionals who are very ambitious. And I remember this conversation we had when you showed me the two trees, that couple at Meiji Jingu,
Mm.
which gives blessings to the union of a couple. And I noticed that so many of my, especially on the professional side, my clients, just talking about their relationship and the sensitivities makes it so high risk for them. They're so scared to even admit
Mm,
that I would like more intimacy with my partner. I would like more playfulness. But just asking that feels like a big risk in
mm.
terms of what will happen if I do and I get rejection and so forth. So I was wondering when you were writing that, how vulnerable you felt writing about your own marriage, your own relationship.
Right. I've always been fascinated by how people behave, and that's the reason I went into psychology. I've always been fascinated by how people make decisions. But even more than that, I'm deeply curious about what shapes people's inner worlds and how we relate to one another, even, across cultures. And I think for me, that curiosity really started with my own family. I wanted to understand, why did my mom behave the way she did? Why did my parents have the kind of conflicts they had? Could those conflicts have been avoided? Was it culture? How much of it is their family histories? How much of it is because of the environment? And of course, the bigger question for me as I became an adult is, will I end up like my parents? Will I end up repeating the same patterns? And that kind of personal wondering eventually led me to broader questions about, human behavior and relationships. And I totally understand what you were saying about how couples feel really vulnerable when they talk about this, because I think it brings up a lot of family history. That's a lot of, I feel like that's a lot of things that you need to dig up there, that very
Absolutely.
sensitive things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And especially in our world, Sherilyn, we're surrounded by communities and societies that are being rewarded, especially in the corporate world, for judging in microseconds. Most of the time, those of us who are successful professionals are decision makers. We're quickly scanning the situation, making a decision. And to think that this piece of information could influence how somebody looks at you, how fluidly you say, I didn't want to end up like that. I will tell you that that personal narrative must have resonated with so many people because most, if not all of us, have quirks in our family, but we
Yeah.
don't have the courage to speak about it. And then we realize it when we are having conversations with colleagues to say, oh, wow, that's how they experienced it in their home. That never happened with me. Or whatever behavior it is, whether it's negative or positive, happens for everyone. Oh, that doesn't?
Mm.
Oh, wow. But having permission to share notes, to be intentional, to say, well, what do I want to bring in my family? Because I'm just rinsing and repeating versions if I don't unpack and process. And many people don't do that, whether
Right.
it's them accessing coaching spaces. And I knew when I talked to you that you would be the ideal person to talk about this with, because you and I are both Gottman trained.
Mm-mm-mm.
The Gottman Institute, wonderful, teaches you about, lasting relationships. They've done so much beautiful research and I was wondering what motivated you, because I know you're transitioning and getting ready to get in your own space of coaching in the relationship stage, in that space. Tell me how it's shaped your own understanding of connection.
Well, first, after I got married and had kids, I realized that I felt most fulfilled when my relationship, when my marriage is going well, with my partner of 15 years, when my kids, I now have three kids who range from teenager to a 5-year-old. So when my relationship with my kids are going well, so that sense of connection with my family really anchors me. I wanted to be more intentional about how I showed up in those relationships. And I wanted to learn skills, that could actually help me be a better partner and better parent. So once I started in that journey and I learned about the Gottman program, and I really loved that it was science-based, real skills, that they have tested. So once I started in that journey, it became natural that I wanted to share what worked for me with other people. It's natural that you want others to, hey, this works. So that led me to train in their program. So it really appealed to me what their practical tools for connection.
That's wonderful. And I cannot wait for you to start. And I know that you're going to be fantastic at this for sure. And because, this is a sensitive topic, and I really appreciate you being willing to discuss this with me. And I'll say this and I'll dive into our podcast
Mm.
topic that a lot of times professionals, executives, we underemphasize the importance of play and sexual intimacy, sexuality, being in touch with that side of your being is such a beautiful space that we don't give enough importance and enough value to, that has so much potential.
So, Shiza, I'd love to know from your experience, why does intimacy take a backseat in Asian relationships? And does this happen also in other cultures?
It's beautiful that you ask me, and my response may be comical, but it's something to think about. Especially in East Asian and South Asian relationships, I see there being a pattern. Because remember, this is also what is known, especially in the West, known as the model minority, right? There's a lot of pressure of success. So when you ask me, does that happen in other cultures? I compare that to anyone in any cultural, ethnic background. It could be white, black, Latino, and of course Asian, because I work with a lot of those professionals. When you become a high performing, successful individual, there is very little time because successful professionals are always working those long hours. They have so many multiple priorities, high stake responsibilities. So it doesn't leave much energy, let alone time, to cultivate intimacy. So that's not like, screaming for attention or has a deadline attached to it. And then there's mental exhaustion. In order to play, you have to schedule time, just like any other thing. And a lot of times, as we grow and mature in our careers, we are not as intentional about it. It feels like just one more thing that we have to do. And literally, it's almost like you don't look at it as something enjoyable, especially when there's not matching libido. It's like, okay, there's something I need to take care of. The other thing is when you are a high achiever, which a lot of people in the Asian culture, we have a lot of pressures, whether we are from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or whether we're from Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, Chinese cultures, there's a lot of high achieving mentality. And so emotional intimacy in that space requires vulnerability. That is
Mm.
too risky, too uncomfortable. And then a lot of times, because we haven't had this conversation, usually I see my couples, especially, my C suite couples, where I'm like, what's going on at home? As I notice that they're not able to focus. And I'm like, well, and I do a check in. I'm like, how's intimacy? Are you spending special time with your partner? And they're like, oh, well, we haven't had sex in a year, or it's been 6 months. The baby's been waking up, or, I've been traveling so much. I come back so exhausted. I have jet lag. There's so many things that are happening. Those priorities, pushing it out to, okay, when things calm down, we'll definitely talk about it. And then it becomes something that becomes a crisis by the time you
Mm.
notice it, because you feel like, oh my God, I'm noticing distance. Why am I feeling that? So there is a lot of vulnerability, and there's a lot of feeling unsafe when you're going in that space. So that emotional avoidance, I feel, also contributes to any successful individual bringing this up, especially as we mature, as we have older kids, as we get more successful. The oldest couple I've done sex therapy with were in their late 60s and 70s. And so a lot of times when I talk to my clients who are in their 50s and 60s, they're like almost feeling awkward until we start talking about it. And then I see this beautiful, playful personality emerge. So, it's really sad. And I'm grateful that you asked this question, that yes, it takes a backseat, especially for Asian professionals, because we're so high achieving. But I think that then that applies to any high performing person until it becomes an intentional thing that you create space
Right.
for in your life.
As you're talking, I could totally relate as an East Asian, Southeast Asian, coming from that background. When you talked about time, lack of time and exhaustion. I mean, Chinese people are probably the hardest working people in the world, I feel. I grew up watching my grandparents like just work themselves to the bone. I've watched my dad just like, work so hard. So really time there wasn't time. I felt like they were asexual in some ways. Work takes a priority, making money is the priority, achieving is a priority. So really there wasn't any space for intimacy. So I could totally see that. And you also mentioned as you were talking about how because intimacy requires making a risk or, like it feels unsafe. Coming from my culture, the East Asian and Southeast Asian culture, certainty is so important. I remember my dad saying, never risk, like always be sure, like take a step where there's certainty, like be very careful about taking risks. So I grew up with this idea like risk is something negative. Therefore, and if intimacy requires risk, then no, you shouldn't even step in that space.
Absolutely. And I
Mm.
would think that, you've nailed it. And I'll talk about vulnerability. When a partner makes a bid for connection and their partner on the other side says no or does not show willingness, it is experienced as such a deep rejection. And why is that? Because there's such less frequency in that bid. The risk keeps growing as the space keeps growing. So if you're just risking asking once every 2 months, that rejection is so heavy.
Mm.
But when it's a part of your play repertoire, and you're like, hey, you wanna, and it becomes a part of life, it's not a big deal because you know that it's going to happen, the certainty element. And that stems from when I talk to my couples about your roles and responsibilities. Because, play, pleasure, sexual intimacy, I invite my couples to think whether you are a president of a company or whether you're working laborious hourly job, it's your responsibility to your partner. And
Mm.
so we cannot, and I invite couples to think that you cannot be mood based in that space. When your partner is making a bid for connection, I'm not in the mood. Well, you have to offer something. It's like someone saying, um, you know, I'm hungry. So, yes, you may not have a 4-course meal available, but say, hey, we have chips, something.
I guess the first thing before that is like there should be open, honest communication between about sex between the partners. But as probably from your experience and also from my experience in my culture, sex is still taboo. There's so much shame, there's so much duty and silence are the norm. So many of us have been raised in conservative households, and I know I was. So this feels very familiar to me. So, how do you guide couples toward a more honest and safe conversation about sex, given this background of shame and duty and silence and taboo? So, how do you move them out of that?
I'll tell you, typically, couples who can afford it go for therapy.
Mm.
They have the conversation there because it's so risky that having it by themselves, it creates a huge risk of how they're going to feel rejected more. But I have something to say about the open and honest conversation because as professionals, we think that that could be a solution. And open and honest conversation is a thing. So I want to tell you something. Those conversations a lot of times don't work. I'll tell you why. A lot of the couples, in fact, I will risk to say most of us don't know how to talk about it. So, how it comes out lands as feedback and criticism on the partner. So when somebody says open and honest communication, I'm like, put the brakes on, put the brakes on. If you're my partner and I'm like, hey, I'm noticing, it's been 3 months, we haven't had sex, we're not, blah, 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 blah.
I'll be defensive.
You're going to be defensive. You're going to
Yeah.
think like, okay, I just got a performance review and I am not meeting expectations.
Right.
So it's really important to know how to talk about it. So it doesn't feel like, it's your fault because I'm the one bringing it up. And then I want to talk about play. It's like telling someone to play, but before that, telling them they suck at it. So it really is not a motivator. So I caution couples and professionals who are listening, please be careful about when, and maybe we'll do a future podcast on how to talk to your partner about
Right. How to talk.
in a
Yeah,
safe way
exactly.
because it's open, honest. Because we overfunction in our communication skills at work. I tell you, most of my couples struggle when they transition that in vulnerable conversations in the bedroom because sometimes they're a little too assertive. Sometimes there's too much critical feedback. Sometimes there's just a level of, depending on what your communication style is, if you try to use that in the bedroom, that's a completely different flavor of you, a different side of you that needs to come out for that conversation.
Mm.
When we it, I miss being with you. I miss that time. What can we do instead of, that feedback on, well, it's been 6 months and 3 days and 4 hours.
Right.
I've tried and you haven't. You're always tired and, blah, blah, blah. And that's not a turn on. So why am I inserting this? So that I hope that anybody who's listening, before they decide to have an open and honest communication, really, really rehearse, practice, think about how you can soften that before you
Right.
ever attempt it.
That's a very good point on how to start that conversation. That like openness is not exactly the answer.
So I will tell you, Sherilyn, it leads me to ask you this question. Because when we were talking about what we should talk about to help Asian professionals, especially South Asian, East Asian, and anybody listening, really, because this is such a tender topic, we talked about couples who've not been intimate for a long time. I remember you talking about your journey in your relationship. And I have asked you before our podcast if you'd be willing to talk about it.
Mhm.
And I would love to open up the space because that's such a beautiful example of what my clients, my couples go through.
Okay. Yeah, so I was sharing with you at that time how my partner and I realized that things weren't really happening in the bedroom for a long, long while. And it wasn't that we didn't care about each other. We love each other. That part is clear. Just life and parenting and work just all got in the way. So we realized things haven't been happening. We made an intentional decision. So he and I talked, and we said, why not just set aside a time, which we playfully called Friday afternoon delight. So it was a Friday
Ooh,
afternoon.
I love it.
But really, it was just the two of us showing up on a Friday afternoon after we have lunch together. And we have a tatami room upstairs, which was pretty much empty. It's just the tatami room. So we didn't bring our phones. There were no distractions. We didn't even have candles or music. Nothing, nothing. Just so it's just him and me and this very empty tatami floor. So at first, the first one, two times that we tried this, it was really awkward because we didn't know how to start. I guess we've been so out of touch with each other for so long that we didn't know where to start. But what we learned is something that I already knew this from Dr. Gottman. So it wasn't something new, but I guess it's hard to apply it to my own life. Connection for sex begins before the actual sex. Gottman talked about how everything is foreplay. Like even you listen to your partner at the end of a long, hard day and you listen wholeheartedly, active listening or something like really, really listen, be fully present to your partner. That's foreplay. When you help each other do the dishes or do chores and do something for each other, that's foreplay. So it is when we connect with each other and we bring in the curiosity we had when we were dating and start asking questions because we change. Like the person we were 15 years ago is not the same person we are today. The thing is, we forget to be curious about each other. We take it for granted that we know each other because we've been together for 15 years. But the truth is, we change, but we've lost that curiosity. So when we bring in the curiosity again about each other, and that cultivates the emotional closeness, the sex and the physical touch naturally follows, is what we experience. So I'm curious. After sharing this, how does this experience land with you? What do you think about it? Do you help couples to shift their understanding of intimacy in this way? How do you help them reconnect with their desire if their desire has been dormant for such a long time?
I will tell you, this is so much music to my ears as you shared this, and thank you so much for being willing to, because this is not an easy thing to talk about. But I will tell you, I want to validate what you're saying, that we start with noticing the emotional disconnection. Because remember, that fondness and admiration, and of
Yes.
course, Gottman talks about it. Esther Perel talks about sexuality and intimacy in a beautiful way, and I've learned so much from her work. They all talk about that whole emotional distance and that weak fondness and admiration. And what happens is that we have to look at so many elements before we ever get to that space, such as resentment. What has been happening in the relationship? Are you showing up for each other? Are you being avoidant? Are you overcompensating? Is there a reason for the detachment? So, all of those need to be explored before you even get into that space to now starting to build that emotional sexual bank account with those beautiful gestures, like helping with the dishes, like listening to each other, like just cuddling and being present and showing so much fondness and interest in each other. Because that's what happens when you're dating, right? You're so curious and interesting. And
Exactly.
somebody could say, well, I went to 7-Eleven, and you'd be like, oh my God, you go to 7-Eleven? That's so cute. Like, just the excitement about something very simple is not there, because now you've been together for 10, 15 years. And it's like, yeah, one more day at 7-Eleven. It's like, so it's not a very exciting thing. So to build that interest, to notice your partner in that special way. And absolutely, we talk about what we can do to rekindle that connection. It's
Mm.
so important. We have so much conditioning, so much shame and guilt. And I will tell you, there's so many societal things that come in the way, like how the bodies look, especially as we are aging. And what we forget is that we're going to be sexual beings till a very, very mature late stages in our life. There is a lot of perfection that social media encourages. So talk about that and to build that encouragement to say that your body is so beautiful to me. It could be that openness to play. and creating that space. So the first step for me is just fertilizing the soil with that before any play happens. I don't know if
Right.
that makes sense.
No, you mentioned that, like we are sexual beings. We are going to be sexual beings. It's hard to imagine elderly people, older people as being sexual. But more importantly, I think it's like we, especially for us women, when we change our role, so from just being a wife and then we become a mother, there's a certain shift. It's very noticeable in the Japanese culture, but also in the Filipino culture. Husbands may not necessarily see their wives as sexual beings as soon as they become mothers. It's like almost like a switch turns off. So they stop being sexual beings. In the Philippine Catholic context, I think there's that Madonna, we call it Madonna war dichotomy. Like you're either the Virgin Mary with a mother, and or you're a sexual being. You can't be both. So it's hard for us to reconcile these two things. In these cultures, extramarital affairs are a way to continue meeting sexual needs. It's very common in the Philippines for men to have affair partners. What is going on beneath this? How can couples begin to reframe that perception that's blocking this intimacy?
I am so glad you brought it up because, and I will tell you, this is not just the Filipino culture or in some East Asian cultures. It is a global issue for so many reasons. Infidelity is something I specialize in, so I see it all the time. And yes, this is a component of it. And I'll tell you, especially for Asian professionals and also just anybody who's a faith following family as well, sex is rarely openly discussed. It's seen as very private, almost taboo. And then topics like desire, pleasure, sexual needs can feel off limits in more conservative households. So this creates a silence or a shame or discomfort when one partner wants to explore. They're almost shamed for having those needs. Or if there is any curiosity or creativity or interest presented, it's shut down as something that is so inappropriate. So that definitely breeds other issues. The other thing that happens, you feel the pressure, like you said, infidelity happens. And then as a result of that, divorce also happens.
Mm,
So many family systems break, and you notice that, there is all of this pressure that couples are feeling to not meet those needs. And I love how you said that, this pure mother image versus being a sexy person cannot coexist.
right.
Whereas it is such a beautiful thing to coexist. We just lose the muscle to notice it that way. And so you just saying that is going to help so many listeners realize, what's going on in my family? What is going on in my relationship? Am I noticing myself that way? Am I noticing my partner that way just because now they have a little bit of a belly or just because, they've reproduced kids, body is looking different? We're still very sexual beings. And that sexual energy can really grow when you are interacting in that playful way. So it is so important to continue igniting that and looking at each other like that. And you talked about foreplay, just gazing at each other. Something simple as eye contact in a sexual way is very different. Can you do the dishwasher, take care of laundry? Like that's a different look.
Yeah.
So really, really creating meaning in those spaces is so important. And I will say that yes, there's a lot of stigma, especially in Asian cultures, and there is a fear of vulnerability. A lot of partners, a lot of my clients I hear from are afraid. And then when they get rejected, it is such a big blow to their esteem, their feeling of being, sexually worthy of touch. That those things mess with your head. So absolutely, it's a very vulnerable thing. It's something you want to at least start thinking about, if not doing something about it.
Yeah, and I see how this affects me as a mother because I react in a certain way towards my kids when it comes to something sexual because I could hear my parents' voices in my head. So I'm very conscious about what I also pass on to my kids based on how I was raised. But this brings me to my next question. Like, do you see generational shifts in conversations about intimacy? Do you feel that the younger generation see intimacy differently than the older generation? I mean, I grew up in a household where I had to pretend that I had zero sexual feelings. Do you see younger couples more open to discussing sexual and emotional needs?
Thank you for asking that question. And I can absolutely affirm there is a generational difference in how it's experienced. I will tell you, Sherilyn, I live vicariously doing sex therapy with my millennial couples, even with like my Gen Zs, where I see a lot of issues are in the Gen Xers, the younger side of, or the boomers, that's where the stigma, you have to be proper. And proper means you have to be asexual pretty much.
Yeah.
How dare you? Like, I remember I have a story from NYU when I was an undergrad. I was an RA. So there was a lot of sexual education that was given to us because, we used to be given a box of condoms to distribute everywhere. And I remember my mom saw this box when she was in my room. She brought our holy book to put on my head to ask me why this is there and what I'm doing with it. And I remember laughing, going, Mom, this is a box of like 500 condoms. So let's even imagine if I was active, what would I do with a box of 500? Like, I was trying to explain that to her, and she was devastated to see that in my dorm room. So those conversations. And then I remember coming back where she was having tea with a lot of the aunties, and they said something that was so inaccurate when it came to sexual health. And here I am, this 20-year-old who knows so much about it. So I corrected her. It's actually not this, it's this. And I don't even remember what that is. But what I remember was the wrath that I got afterwards in my mom saying, how dare you pretend like you know all of this stuff? And that's so inappropriate. Like, I could see the shame coming up for her that this is my 20-year-old who lives in New York and is talking about sex in front of my friends. And it wasn't even something sexual. It was just sexual health information. I remember that was like
Something basic. Yeah.
but I was like, so there is a lot of that proper protocol for how dare you like talk about it.
Wanted to ask your advice on a small actionable step that the couple can take this week to help begin rebuild intimacy.
Beautiful. I love it. What I would like to tell couples is that what you want to do is just go and reach out to your partner and make a bid for connection. What does that mean? That means that you introduce the idea of whatever foreplay could be for you. That doesn't mean you're asking for sex. You're asking for this whole performance. It's just you giving and noticing each other in a sexual way. Whether that means kissing your partner on the ear, whether that means listening to them with earnesty, whether that means giving them very intentional feedback on something you noticed about them. Just something different from what you do on a daily basis that makes your partner feel, wow, this felt different. I haven't felt this way from my partner in a while. I don't want you to think this is like something huge. Just anything that becomes very fluid and comfortable for you, that comes naturally to you, and not even an ask, but a give. And I want you to be intentional in thinking about how that felt, because in this space, actually giving that pleasure or giving that feeling to your partner definitely has side effects of you feeling so good about yourself.
I like that. It doesn't have to be big. It can be small and it's very doable.
Absolutely. And it feels like self-care. It's like you've
Mm.
noticed a part of your being that has been unnoticed for a while. So I would love to invite everyone who's listening to this, talk about or think about what they've been missing and make a little bit of connection with your romantic partner in that space.
Right. And I feel that magic will happen.
Absolutely. Cherylyn, this was just so lovely talking to you. And I feel that we probably need to do a follow-up conversation, maybe in the coming weeks, on all these thoughts that are coming up for me. And I'm hoping questions that are coming up for you that we can continue pursuing and unpacking with those who are listening and viewing.
Thank you so much, Sheeza. It's been a pleasure. I learned so much. Every time I talk to you, I just feel like I learned so much. Thank you so much.
It was just a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for making time. And for all those of you listening, please make sure to connect with me on your favorite social media platforms, and looking forward to talking with you soon again. Please remember to keep listening and watching as part of your weekly self-care and learning ritual. You know there are lots of commonalities in our lives, relationships, in our joys and struggles. And my hope is that this material will help you expand your perspective, give you some clarity on how to think about things, and ultimately make you feel better and sorted about your